welcome back to my channel and time for another episode of Luke's Reviews. On today's video, I think the film that we're going to be discussing is, quite frankly, not just the most anticipated film of this year, but one of the most anticipated films that we have had in a long time, because this marks the official dawn of the newly revamped DCU, and James Gunn is captaining the ship in what he's hoping is going to get this franchise off to a flying start with Superman. We're foregoing the origin story this time round, as when we join Superman, he has already made his presence known for 3 years now. But after inserting himself into the middle of a geopolitical war, despite his best intentions, Superman is now coming under fire. And for multi-billionaire and #1 Superman hater Lex Luthor, that means he can attempt to strike while the iron is hot, and look to dismantle Superman even further. To say that this film had to be a success, I think is a colossal understatement. There's no questioning it. Given what had happened previously, when Warner Brothers went down the route of the DCEU, whether you love it or you hate it, that entire experiment failed. Be it a lack of cohesion, unwarranted studio interference, or just a general absence of an overarching plan, interest fizzled out, resulting in the studio extending an olive branch to Guardians of the Galaxy and the Suicide Squad director James Gunn to hit that inevitable refresh button. And there was reason to be hopeful, because James Gunn, who is overseeing the DCU, was actually going to go on board to direct and write his opening film, a Superman movie, and we know what he's capable of. He crushed it with his Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. The Suicide Squad was probably one of the highlights in the DCEU, and he managed to extend that with the Peacemaker TV show as well. But was he able to transfer that success and give this new universe the jumping off point that it needed? This is going to go down like a ton of lead. No.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. God have mercy on your soul.
Okay, I know that it's not the popular opinion right now. Look, I want it on the record. I was unabashedly excited for this film. And I say that. I love Man of Steel. I think it genuinely might be one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. And as you can see over my shoulder here, I have an affinity for some of the other DCEU movies as well. Were they perfect? No. But I was all for the DCEU coming to a close because it was just stringing it along with no end game in sight and starting afresh, starting anew. That being said, I had my trepidations about James Gunn not overseeing the universe, but specifically Gunn working on a Superman movie. But my trepidations were thankfully numbed because I saw a lot of the marketing that this film was putting out, and there was a real understanding of the importance and presence of this character in particular. But it was as I sat in my cinema seat and I was watching the movie unfold that those trepidations really started to rear their ugly head and come on knocking. The biggest complaint that I have about Superman is that it never felt like I was watching a Superman movie, and instead it was like I was just seeing James Gunnisms plastered everywhere, a lot of them being his more unfortunate traits. Ultimately, I think it comes down to tone. Now, by no means do I need a dark and gloomy Superman. An argument could be made that we got that in Man of Steel. Superman is a beacon of hope and the symbol of kindness and a savior to all. And I'll be honest, in Gunn's screenplay, they achieve that. Superman is a do-gooder, putting the lives of all as his top priority. He says gosh and darn. He yearns to see the good in everyone so that one day they might inspire hope onto others. All of that is present, clear as day. But at the same time, when bringing Superman alive, there needs to be a sense of majesty to him, a sense of awe. He is, after all, a god among humans. And Gunn's movie never allows us to be in that sense of awe. Flying scenes are shot predominantly on a close up of Superman's face. We should be dazzled by the fact that there is a man flying on screen. That is the simplest appeal of Superman. Look at the tagline for the 1978 Richard Donner original. You will believe a man can fly. That belief wasn't there for me. There has to be a balance. I get that between Superman's humanity and his mythic status as a superpowered being. And in the case of this film, it takes that mythic element of Superman and abandons it almost entirely. Another fear that I had was how silly James Gunn was likely to make the film. Of course, we knew what he was perfectly capable of doing in Guardians 1 and 3, where, for sure, there are plenty of outrageous moments, but at the same time, he knew when to strip those back and make sure that the focus was on character and story and really dialing up the emotion when it was needed. Guardians 2, I don't think achieved that personally. I think a lot of time was spent, if there was any potential for emotion or weighty story beats, that it would abandon that for a simple joke or a gag, and it deflated a lot of that overall investment that I had watching the film. So my overall question going into Superman was: were we going to get Guardians 1 and 3 James Gunn, or are we going to get Guardians 2? I'm sorry to say that I think we got Guardians 2 James Gunn. Besides maybe the engineer, I think every single character is at some point in the film a source of comedy. Whenever the emotion is heightened, there is always a joke that comes zooming in and totally undercuts any weight of the moment that was just being built. For instance, and this is a very, very mild spoiler warning, so just know that this discusses a tiny, tiny plot detail, and I will tiptoe over the details, of course. But there's a sequence in which Superman has been significantly weakened in a particular moment, and he is starting to regain his powers. Now, in that moment, there was the possibility of everything that had been laid out for it to be an epic, awe-inspiring moment where Superman regains his powers and you're reminded of just the legend that he is. But that is taken away because whilst that is going on in the center of the frame, you've got this really petty squabble going on between two characters who we've not properly met. We don't really know who they are, and it's a loud, dominating squabble happening over the top. It's pointless, and it saps so much investment away from what could have been one of the highlights of the film. And that happens consistently. Anytime there is a moment where the film is about to deliver a level of grandeur that the character of Superman so richly deserves, it is taken away for a goofy joke or one liner that, all right, yeah, some of them might be funny, but in that moment is wholly unnecessary. And it has a domino effect because in doing so, it removes any notion of threat or danger when the stakes are inevitably raised. The big finale climax, I couldn't care because never did I feel that there was genuinely a risk or jeopardy to any of the characters. Because the film, I don't think, did a good enough job of sufficiently building the foundations for the stakes. I also wasn't too thrilled about the wider building blocks that Gunn was starting to assemble for the DCU as a whole. I totally appreciate that this Superman story did not need to be an origin of the character. We don't need a recap on Krypton or him discovering his powers. However, even if we're not doing all of that, there still needs to be a general introduction to these characters and this world. We all know who Lois Lane is, but who specifically is this Lois Lane? The Justice Gang, comprised of the Guy Gardner Green Lantern, Mr. Terrific, and Hawk Girl, all feature in the film, but they just show up. Almost as if the audience expects us to know who they are, and so very little is achieved to establish them. They may look cool and crack some funnies here and there, but for an opening movie in this universe, you can't just throw characters at the wall and hope that they stick when you have not done a good enough job to introduce us to who they are. Don't just say, here's a Green Lantern. 75% of the audience aren't going to know what a Green Lantern is. They're just going to think, oh, that was the really bad Ryan Reynolds movie. It honestly feels like we have just been dropped in this universe, in this world, and somehow we're expected to be the ones playing catch up. And I think most egregiously of all, the screenplay expects you to care for these characters, but not because of any of the work that they've done. It's because, oh, yeah, it's Superman, it's Lois Lane, it's Jimmy Olsen, it's Perry White. You love these characters, have fun with them. Well, no, because who are these characters in this world? Take Matt Reeves' The Batman, for instance. I know that it's set in an Elseworlds universe, that whole thing I could do a different video on, but even that wasn't an origin story. But it still took the time to really lay the foundations for the relationships, for the world of Gotham City. And even Batman himself, he had an arc in that film. Superman, I mean, yeah, he goes on a bit of a journey, but at the end of the day, he's kind of back where he started, having just been proven right for the whole story. And my final negative, because I feel like this is just becoming a bit of a hate video when that's really not how I feel about the film. I'll touch on my positives in a moment. But the only other negative I have is that there is some seriously unsubtle political commentary that goes on involving Superman involving himself in the affairs of two foreign lands. Make of that what you will. As I said, it is not subtle at all. And whilst in principle, I completely agree with the ethos of what it's discussing, the way in which it is handled in the film is so heavy handed, so painfully on the nose that I kind of just wish that it wasn't in the film to begin with. So, in short, no. I don't think James Gunn was the right choice to write or direct this Superman movie. That doesn't mean that I think he's a terrible filmmaker. I just think that his tone didn't suit this particular character, and neither did I think that it made for a particularly accessible start to this new universe. But it isn't all doom and gloom, because believe it or not, I do have some positives with this film. Predominantly the casting. It is spot on. David Corenswet is a fantastic Superman. Personally, I would have liked to have seen more of the bumbling Clark Kent persona, but as the Man in Blue, he really delivers. The way in which he carries himself, the aura he possesses, there was never a moment in my mind where I doubted if he was Superman. There's lots of fun uses of his powers, which make a lot of the action scenes really pop. And when the film does take the very, very rare moment to pause and reflect upon any of the weighty material that has been going on, he does a tremendous job in portraying this internal conflict that is going on inside Superman's head. Rachel Brosnahan made for a very charming and headstrong Lois Lane. Her and Clark's interview that we had seen a glimpse of in the trailers was probably one of the strongest scenes for me, because you suddenly see the ruthless journalist Lois Lane take over, and even when she's talking to her love interest, she will question everything. But funnily enough, it was actually Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor who impressed me the most. No offense to Hoult, but I just wasn't sure if he had what it took to play this evil mastermind, Lex Luthor. And he proved me wrong. He is incredibly sinister and manipulative. The hatred he possesses for Superman surges through him and makes him do some truly horrific things. There are some elements that I didn't love about Lex, to do with just him having suddenly a pocket universe and there being no explanation as to how he managed to see that. I think that would have been a great moment to establish the intellect of Lex, is that he discovers a pocket universe and how he then chooses to fill it, as opposed to him already having one and we're just expected to accept that this is now a thing. Everything about it is just all very convenient, but I don't think that that diminishes any of the work that Nicholas Hoult put into this role. He did an amazing job. I also really like Skylar Gisondo as Jimmy Olsen. Now, Jimmy Olsen, this is easily the most consequential part that he has ever played in any of the films, and Gisondo is effortlessly likable as a reluctant heartthrob, but also a damn good journalist. In all honesty, he is probably the character where you should have directed most of your comedic moments in the film, rather than literally every single character getting a piece of that comedy pie. And then there's Crypto, who is just the sweetest and most adorable ball of chaos you could imagine. And having him predominantly just behave like a dog was a genius decision. He's tremendous fun in the film, and I really hope that we just get to see a lot more of him in this universe moving forward. So, yeah. The film that pretty much everyone is raving about right now, I didn't like it. There's promise and potential, so by no means am I suggesting that the DCU has failed barely before it's begun. But as an opening to this universe, I can't help but feel like it was a bad call to have it so full to the brim that it had no other option but to overflow. The constant humor is draining, and barely was I ever amazed by Superman on the big screen. It was almost treated mundanely, which ultimately comes down to why I think James Gunn was the wrong choice to helm this project, as he appeared to treat it as if it were a literal Saturday morning cartoon. Think of it this way: I've always considered that if Superman were a concert, it would be an epic orchestral piece. What we got here was a loud punk rock riot. Now, that may suit other superheroes, such as Guardians of the Galaxy, but personally, I don't believe that is best for Superman. So, yeah, I'm really gutted to be so disappointed by this film. I'm gonna give Superman a 5.5 out of 10. Anyway, guys, those were my thoughts on Superman. I know it is probably going to be a bloodbath in the comments, so let's be kind, let's be civil. What did you think of the film? Did you like it? Did you fall in line with me and were just a little disappointed? Let me know in the comments below. And my question to you, whether you thought he was the right choice or not, if there were a Superman sequel and James Gunn were not to return, who would you like to see take the reins for the Man of Steel? And you can't say Zack Snyder, okay? It's done. Bury it. But that is all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Hello, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have, make sure to click that like button, and if you aren't already, click that subscribe button too.